It was very religious and the main focus was slavery. People who have been born into a cult, what's your story? Ex-Mormon here, in case that counts. Let's see if I can condense 2 decades of BS. I was raised from birth to be a mom. That was my divine role and the teachings were structured around that message. Your job is to birth children. It's the greatest thing you can ever do. Every decision must revolve around making that work. Even if you're broke college students, you must not delay a family for anything. You're raised to believe that getting baptized at 8 is your choice, but it's never actually presented that way. The lessons are always phrased like, when you're baptized, this will happen. You're also explicitly taught that you can't get into the good heaven unless you get baptized and marry in the temple. From 18 months on you are taught lessons of obedience, one of which is tithing. 10% of any income for that $124 billion church, and that's just with assets that can be found. 4-year-olds are expected to tithe birthday money from grandma. Tithing is supposed to be paid before feeding your kids or paying rent, and if you do, some miracle is supposed to happen to get those monetary needs met. Temple rituals involve weird clothes and are largely copied off Freemasonry. Only temple recommend holders, aka tithe payers, can enter the temple, so unworthy family members are regularly excluded from weddings. 12-year-olds get dunked in a water tank for dead people. These rituals have also been recently changed to remove references to killing yourself and naked touching. Speaking of changes, the most correct book, the Book of Mormon, has had roughly 100,000 edits, including a passage that says wicked people are cursed with dark skin. God apparently restored his church on the earth and then changed it. Repeatedly. The verbiage in lessons involves an us versus them mentality. Non-members, anti-Mormon literature, etc. You are taught so repeatedly that the world is out to get you and that you cannot look at those sources of information that it creates a persecution complex. Anytime anyone mentions anything negative about the church, the walls go up and that naysayer is treated like they're making a personal, ugly attack on everything that member ever is. If you try to leave, you are expected to meet with leadership and possibly also missionaries several times to try and get you to change your mind. At church you are taught that people only leave because someone offended them, because you want to sin without the guilt, because you didn't feel welcome, etc. None of that talk is about discovering old Joe was a career con man. These meetings are framed around that mentality and you have to go through several of them. If you want to avoid all that, you need a notarized letter explicitly stating you want to leave. A notarized letter. 2. Stop attending church. If you try to ghost them and stop going, they send your ministering sisters or brothers to come check on you. As a member you are assigned someone to go with you and visit people, aka check up on them, to see how they are doing and if their needs are met. When you try to leave, these people are usually deployed to bug you and get you to come back. When parents find out about your lack of faith they try guilting you back as well, but more from the approach of, how could you do this to me? If your relationship with them is okay, this hits hard because the heaven aspect of the religion involves eternally linked families and you are breaking that link. Parents are taught that they will answer personally for apostate children, so they usually try very hard to get you to come back. There's more, so much more, and some of it uglier than this, but that can be found with a Google search. Basically, this church cult thrives on guilt and mental manipulation to keep their members submissive and financially profitable. Breaking out of that mental game is extremely hard, and when you do you are hunted down and guilted back. To summarize, I was groomed from birth to be a baby factory and now I'm stuck in that role with no career prospects. Thankfully my husband is woke and encourages me to be more than what I was raised for. We're still deprogramming, though. I was born into Scientology. We would go to church often and while I was technically never forced to do courses, but everyone, family and staff are very pushy on you to attend and do services. Our family disconnected from others when they got SP declared so I would lose friends randomly throughout childhood. Most of it is reading books written by Hubbard and attending events where people beg or demand money to save the world from psychiatry. They really push on people that the world is evil and falling apart, but thankfully you're a Scientologist and this group is going to save the world. I stopped believing when I realized how much Scientology operates like a business. Free stress test on every window. Can you imagine if Catholic churches had gaudy banners advertising free confessionals? Today? The other event is called the Golden Age of Knowledge. Every test and bridge level was rebranded and re-edited and they had members purchase stuff they already owned. So for years no one was getting Scientology. Instead of apologizing, giving refunds, or issuing credit, staff say, "Isn't this great? They've stolen tens of thousands of dollars from people and there isn't a shred of remorse. They just want more money. I got extremely lucky and had wonderfully friends that helped me get out. I couldn't have done it without them. I'll share my story even though it wasn't me or my family directly. My closest friend in college, we'll call him C, moved to Cali after he graduated. We kinda lost touch after a year or so. A bit later on, I got a call from his mother out of the blue one day. She must have had to dig just to get my cell number, but she starts off and asks me if I've talked to C lately. I tell her no, it's almost been a year since I last chatted with him. She then goes on to tell me to please reach out to her if I'm able to get in touch with him in any way. He apparently got involved with some cult, sold all of his belongings, and disappeared without any contact with his previous life. They have a private detective in Cali right now searching for him. I don't hear from either of them again for a year after that. Time goes by, and what do you know, I get a call from C one day. He moved to a new city coincidentally a few hours from the new city I had moved to. He's weird on the phone though. Super outgoing energetic dude, sounds like a zombie. It's time I talk to him. I invite him to my city to spend a weekend to catch up. He actually drives down, and stays for a 3-day weekend, and I don't recognize this dude at all. He seemed like equal parts zombie, depressed, anxious, relieved, all at the same time. It was an awkward weekend. The cult thing didn't get broached once. I was never 100% sold on the C joined a cult story, but without a single person hearing from him, it wasn't the worst possible scenario of all things, I guess. Having him sit in front of me that weekend, it firmed that theory up. So I didn't bring it up that weekend, never have actually. Just tried to make him feel at home, and throw some nostalgia his way, you know. It's been about a decade now, he's married and a dad now. He wrote a novel, kinda sci-fi fiction. It's about a dude who gets caught up in a cult. Then he transcends reality and time, and it kinda goes from there. Anyway, I ain't trying to write a book here, but thought I'd share just the short version of one of the crazier stories I've ever lived through. A distant family member of mine headed a new age cult that I got roped into when I left home and went to college close by. It started out as a group of friends of theirs that I became close to, because they were the only family around, but then things escalated quickly. It went from love bombing, which I really needed because my family had gone through a terrible divorce and the family was never the same after that, to soon after becoming my one and only family. The cult's beliefs were that the love and the connections that we all had with one another were the hope for the future. And the family member who formed this cult was the original creator of everything, and then was supposed to turn everything over to us, the group whose love could take things over. Of course, the group always failed and we were always in trouble, and in order to become right we would have to give away our money and time to very hard, manual labor until we were exhausted. We were so exhausted that anything you told us we would believe. Well, after a death in my immediate family I stopped showing up to the events and meetings of the cult that I normally would. I was given a break. During that break I reflected and realized I needed to get out. I lived on site with that family member, so it wasn't easy and I was in limbo for a while. Still doing manual labor, but not fully committed like I was before. I was working, and I met my current partner who eventually realized what was going on and helped me out. We moved in together and I have since cut 100% of my ties, without ever giving any reason. I feel a lot of it was dealing with extreme narcissism from the leader, so that is really the best way to get out of that situation. To leave unannounced and abruptly. My ex-stepdad had a church in our backyard and he turned one of our bedrooms into a prayer room. 4 days a week a group of about 40 would come to the house. They would burn incense through the house, make me read candles and say things like I see angels and I see the Virgin Mary's hands. 4 people would sit in chairs, wearing white robes, and they would embody certain individuals. My mom would be the Virgin Mary for example and speak in a monotone voice, "How can I help you, my child?" It lasted about 5 years and then my mom became normal and she tries to forget that part of her life. She was very weak and vulnerable after divorcing my dad, and my ex-stepdad was a manipulator. He left her for a younger woman and started another new family and moved his church somewhere else. My ex-boyfriend and his sister were born into a cult. His father was, and still kinda is, a biblical literalist, and his mother just complied religiously. Pun intended. So basically biblical literalism speaks for itself, but to clarify, it's an interpretation of the Bible where one takes every single thing literally, even when it's supposed to be figurative or whatever. That's what got his father into their mess, and the mother didn't have the guts and brains to speak up. Instead, she let her husband raise their children under the cult. Didn't really have a choice, no, but I do not pity her. Their cult wasn't insane or interesting like how you see other cults in movies or magazines. Don't get me wrong, it was fucked up in its own way, but it wasn't the type of cult where they do horrendous, despicable acts with children or anything. This cult's whole foundation was built on control. Just like you'd see some Christians preach about literalism and strictness, that's what they did. You could only wear certain fabrics, colors, styles. Everything they ate was in accordance to biblical law, like, no eating animals with hooves? So no hot dogs. You couldn't listen to music, except for hymns at church, so when I tell you that I was constantly putting my ex onto music I grew up with. It was just crazy to me, but understandable all the same. At one point we were listening to Bohemian Rhapsody and he looked me in the eyes and said, "This song is actually really good, who sings this again?" Anyways, there was a plethora of rules to obey and commands to follow. Boys were to play with boys, girls were to play with girls. No child was to be outside later than 4 p.m. You had to write your prayers down in a prayer journal that was reviewed by elders, or overseers I think he called them. And education was basically this big, unofficial homeschool group. The rules were just as lame there. Kids were not to speak unless spoken to, lots of physical consequences, blah blah blah. I don't know much about how it works throughout the teenage years because his parents divorced and were kicked out of the cult, or they managed to leave before they got a divorce? I don't remember. I want to say the latter because then I'd be more keen on knowing what happens when you're thrown out. Regardless, it was his father who came to his senses about the cult, but with it he basically disowned his kids and gave them to his mom. This was taking place in PA, so his mom stayed there, and his father moved to FL and now has another wife and stepson. His father re-entered his kids' lives before they both graduated high school. They have neither forgiven nor forgotten. My ex definitely has PTSD from it all. He only shared the basics, along with a few things that messed him up. But I'm sure there's loads he hasn't processed or shared with me. He gets nightmares and flashbacks, and it's actually really difficult to witness. I wish I could remember more. It's not a really cool story to share or anything, but I thought I'd shout it out there and maybe someone would enjoy. My grandparent was the leader of a smallish cult. It was very religious based, and the main focus was pedophilia and slavery. My name growing up was Slave 2, and my role was to do all the chores on the farm, all the housework and to please my master. I got out. My body has some pretty horrible scars and I'm okay to talk about my past, though I've lost a lot of friends due to oversharing. This is going to be a long story, but I'll add as much details as I can without it being ridiculously long. In high school, we had a health class of sorts where we sat with a counselor and talked about ourselves, our normal daily routine. On the first day we had to write a list of all our nicknames, which is a fairly simple task, so I wrote down all my main nicknames. Since Slave 2, Witch, Dog, Rat and Stupid were the top 5, the counselor had more questions. The next day I explained what my life was like, and when I got to the part that my father had come into my room often, she stopped the session and took me immediately to the police. I told the police everything I could remember about my life. Being starved and assaulted made it harder to remember, but I tried. They told me I didn't have to go back, and I accepted their offer and never went back. I was 14. Growing up, people did notice and I'd had made videos before through the police, legally documenting what was happening to me, the bruises and injuries, etc. However, when it all really mattered, my father blackmailed a doctor and got her to change medical records, which wiped all the evidence I had. Apparently when police checked, my medical records were missing huge chunks, but they didn't know who did it. Due to the lack of evidence, my case sits as a cold case. They're just waiting for a plea of guilt, more evidence, or someone else to say something. My brother and I often planned to escape, since he didn't like the lack of food either, but while it was plausible that I could have run off the property, the cult has their fingers in a much larger community, so anyone driving past would have picked us up and taken us back. And based on the punishments I received for being 1 second too slow to answer something, the thought of the punishments I'd receive for trying to run away kept me on the property. There are still people trapped there. After my brother and I left, my father just had more kids, so my half-siblings are there. From what I've heard, the eldest one almost died from turning septic due to neglect, and his new wife's parents moved in to help raise them after that, so I hope they're fed more, but I know they'll have pretty bad lives. I feel sorry that I can't do much about it, but at the same time my father's health is declining, so I hope something happens that stops the cycle of abuse. The hardest part of escaping was living in constant fear of being taken back, But when you live in such a situation for so long, you develop a sixth sense as to when bad people like him are around, which saved me from him plenty. For example, he turned up at the high school and tried to kidnap us, but my gut feeling hit before he got there, so I managed to remove myself and my brother from the situation. I found out later that he almost punched a pregnant teacher and the principal, and eventually was removed from the premises. I finally realized I was safe from harm when I shifted into my own place in a completely different part of the country with my partner, many years later. It finally clicked that he didn't know I was here, none of the cult could reach me, and I was safe. However, part of him is still in my mind, in the flashbacks and the grief. I lost a child he fathered, and so that brings up a whole can of worms when people ask if I want kids or have kids. Part of him will always be with me, and I'm still dealing with that. I might get hate for my gender, but I'm a trans man. I'm not trans because of what happened to me, even though a lot of accepting members of my family think that. I've known I was a male before I recognized what was happening to me was wrong. Our mother left the cult when I was very young by divorcing our father. Due to the law here though, she couldn't just take us with her when she left, so she had to watch us grow up in that environment. When I left, I stayed with our mother. Things were quite rocky for a while since my relationship with her wasn't the best, but now she's really supportive and kind. I was able to start transitioning when I lived alone in uni, with help from numerous counselors. I still attend uni, but now I live with my partner, so transitioning is easier, just because of the better support. My brother is younger, though not by much. He was raised to be like my father, but he was disgusted by it. He didn't have to do the chores and such until I left, and he then left 6 weeks later through the police, because he couldn't handle the chores. He simply refused to go back and stayed with our mom and I. My brother is coping as far as I can tell. He gets physically ill if anything reminds him of the past though, so we just don't talk about it. The cult members often stops by our mothers to torment them, so I hear through our mom what's going on. She just managed to get a home security system, so hopefully that stops soon. She lives about 30 minutes drive from the main cult, and the members bother because they're petty. Her ex, which is my father, or my grandparent, or they've been told to by my grandparent. Mostly they just knock on the door and taunt her. Sometimes they'll leave dirty laundry on her front step, sometimes it's a note or a card written on by multiple personalities. Both my grandparent and father have several diagnosed mental illnesses, bipolar, DID and schizophrenia, which is probably why they're still doing it more than half a decade after we left. They refuse to get medication because it's everyone else that's wrong, so unfortunately they're not going to get better. For everyone interested, the place of the cult is New Zealand, the South Island, which runs differently from the North Island due to how funds are split. Other victims did come forward, however a lot of them told the cult leader instead of going to the police because we were made to trust the leader and hate the police. The cult leader then just used the cult to silence them. Some died, suicide, but not by choice, others turned to drugs and disappeared. Because of the laws here, you basically have to attend whatever school you're in zone for. Homeschool only applies to people who are very out of zone, and then those parents have to go through the government and get special training where they essentially set up a temporary school for those kids and their neighbors. Because I was in zone for a country school, I went there instead. Then I went to a zone-less high school who took kids from anywhere. I want others who are in the situation I was in to know that it does get better. Getting out is incredibly difficult. It's also okay to not yet have the strength to make that leap. There were times I hit rock bottom, where I thought the only way out was to end it, but I couldn't do that because my brother and my cat, who I managed to rescue through the help of the police, needed me to be strong, brave and alive for their sake. Currently I live with my wonderful partner who knows everything and goes above and beyond to help me, and now our, cat, who suffers from issues from her past like I do. She didn't get treated much better, and I have never been happier. Going through the entire process and telling countless people what happened and dealing with the court who try to spin the story and humiliate you is really hard, but surviving on scraps, breaking my body to complete chores and being used every day was much harder. I understand some people can't break the cycle, they can't escape, and my heart goes out to them. This is why more awareness needs to be raised, so those who can't get out, can be saved. Thanks for listening to Radio TTS. Hit the subscribe button and activate the notification bell for more videos. Click the right box for the Radio TTS playlist and let us know what the next video should be about.